who is a descendant, was very involved in around the 80th anniversary in interviewing. And what I'd like to do right now is to have the descendants in the room please stand up and identify yourself and briefly say whatever you would like about the striker that is your relative and brings you here tonight. John, can we start with you?
I'm John Hanson, son of John Hanson. My father was a member of the Committee of 100. He was a coal truck driver, so he was involved in the first strike and was involved through the whole series of three strikes. I can say this, he was a very gentle and kind of quiet guy, had a great sense of humor. Certainly loved people, loved animals, grew up on a farm. And he, as many others, were in desperation in those times. And in order to get a living wage, they needed to do something.
I don't know if I can get the mic to every single person, but can you just go row by row and just introduce yourself?
I'm an outlaw.
She says she's an outlaw.
But at least, well, I'm an outlaw. I'm married to VR. Should I? Oh my goodness. Such a sight. Yeah, I'm married into this family. So VR was my husband's grandpa, so you know him that way. Grew up hearing a lot of stories. Still have his pictures around the house. Wear the IWW t-shirts. I wish I could have met him. He passed before I joined the family. But I'm really proud of his hard work. It's right here to say yes. Randy, you probably don't know this.
I basically have the same story. I'm even younger than her, so.
Believe it or not.
Another Grant Dunn.
Another Grant. Another Grant Dunn.
And I didn't know much about VR, but yeah, this is important to me.
I'm David Sundin. I am a descendant grandchild of Ray Dunn Vincent. Did know him. I was sort of just becoming an adult when he passed, but heard the discussions in the living room and around the table, family, was told what went on in the strike. My sister will probably have more to say around that. And to me, I guess what it did to me, it really was essentially where a lot of my worldview came from, and it kind of really made me start seeing things in a different way. Learning what went on then and hearing what he was active in. So we thank him for that.
Great-granddaughter of VR. Never met, I didn't get to meet the guy either, he died well before I was born, but I've been to lots of the labor picnics, I've heard plenty of stories from my mother, my uncle. I've read some of the books he gifted to both of them. Books are his big present thing you like to give for different holidays, and that gave me some insight into him. And I'm just proud to be a member of this family.
Linda Layton, my grandfather was VR Dunn, that's my brother. And yes, it really, knowing about this strike drove a lot of what I've done my entire life. And I've worked with unions and have been a union member and an activist around that most of my adult life. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you, Peter and Beth and volunteers and staff and everybody else for doing this. My name is Reuben Latz. I'm a retired maker in the Minnesota Association of Professional Employees. My grandfather, Reuben, who died 2 months before I was born, was at the time, I believe, the Association for the Amalgamated Clothing and Laundry Workers Union. And the stories that I have read or heard, a very little family heritage has been passed directly. So what I understand is that he was primarily or partially responsible for food distribution. I don't remember the name of the other guy who helped organize, but I think there were 2 men who took primary responsibility for that activity. I don't know whether my grandmother Rose was part of that kitchen scene that we saw in the film or not, but I suspect she probably was. Third generation union guy. My dad was an ITU card holder in the International Typographical Union, and I'm very proud. Proud and grateful.
I'm Francis Hanson Jr. and my father, Francis Hanson Sr., was involved in the strike, and I remember hearing stories where he would ride around in Pete Jodine's big black Buick and as a flying picket that would go out and stop trucks from moving when they got a call from the union office.
All right.
Hi, I'm Fran Hansen, my cousin John Hansen. Since his father was active, my father and his father were brothers. And so in the early 70s, I was taking a class in Minnesota history and it held about the strike. And I knew that my dad was involved. And I talked to my parents, and my mother was saying that she was involved. She was at the strike headquarters, and she would bandage up people and make food for them, and then they'd have flyers and she'd distribute some of those things. And then, I heard all about my dad. And Bernie Konsky, who was shot in the back, was a good friend of mine with my parents. So whenever we visited them, from then I'd ask them about friends around the strike. And it really made an impact on me, because I think people, it makes it so much more impressive. But I'm so in awe of how courageous those strikers were. The conditions, and they were getting beaten and all that, and they persisted. And, I'm finished, so we have a term called sisu, which means persistence, and that, and they had a lot of sisu.
Yeah.
Judson Saplo, my great-grandfather Otto, he was in the streets during the strike. Unfortunately, he passed at a very early age of heart problems when I got involved in the union and politics. My grandfather told me a lot of stories about him. He was 16 at the time, so most of the stories came down to I was told to stay home and stay alive. And he'd report back to me every night and tell me what happened, and that's most of what I know.
All right.
father was involved in the strike. And I have to say I really honor him for what he did for me personally. The stories he told, one particular one was when the strikers were out there battling and they had some deputy policemen that came to fight against them. And while they were fighting, the deputies were taking off their badges because they were afraid of getting beat up. And Dad would go behind and pick up all these badges and put them in his bag as the guys, when deputies went running away. So they really did a lot of fighting, and I must say that I benefit from my father being an educator. I knew I was super involved in the union all my life as an educator. And Minnesota is really great with the unions, and I hope it stays strong.
I believe Jason Ness is in the room. Yes? Yes.
Yes. I can. I'm Jason Ness. My grandpa was Henry Ness. My dad was in the Teamsters. I didn't know him. Just a few things my dad would talk about, but my dad didn't really talk about it much. He talked about him being in the union, and I remember a strike when he was there, and it was, you didn't cross the pickets, you didn't do nothing. I'm just trying to find out about my grandma. That's why I'm here. I don't know a lot about her. And I'm with the unions and everything, but I'm really here to find out about my grandma. So, thank you.
Cool.
Just a quick story for the Ness family, and then we'll move to our panel. Dave Reilly, who's on the panel, and I were contacted this past year by a young woman named Ella May Ireland. She was in 8th grade and doing her history project on the 1934 strike. And as it turns out, her great-great-grandfather presided over the Ness funeral. And she is very interested in meeting your family and also trying to find out more about that time. But her history project ended up being a set of imaginary letters from your grandmother, Frida, talking about what had occurred and what it was like to have 4 children and to have lost her husband. And very powerful. Ella has also written a letter to the powers that be, governor and police. And I don't believe that she has sent this yet, but she's getting ready to, asking for a formal apology. For the murders of Henry Ness and John Moore, and also for the 67 wounded and shot in the back on Bloody Friday. There are two things that we want to do before we open to some discussion. One is that we have a panel with historians Peter Ratcliffe and David Reilly and descendant Linda Layton. Just to comment, I think, on the strike and the documentary. And then Keith Christensen, who's in the back, who is responsible for the 1934 strike game that maybe some of you are aware of, that is housed here at the Eastside Freedom Library, has also pushed very hard and recently more successfully to begin to create a 1934 archive. And so he will, why don't you do that now, in fact, right before the panel, just briefly share information about what that archive is intended to do and be.
Excuse me. Thanks, Clarence. Hi, everybody. It's a big night for us, the 85th anniversary of the strike. Can you hear me okay? Boy, it's really something to celebrate. The film really makes me happy and it's inspiring to me. It's a great story, important story. But for me, most importantly, it's relevant. It's really usable history to make things better. That's motivation for me. I've been active with the member 1934 committee, and we've been active creating street festivals and sponsoring the picnics, and more recently creating a plaque for the in commemoration of the strike, which is established and installed at the site of Bloody Friday. One of the fun parts of the movie for me is to see that they say there's no mention of the strike. Well, there is today, right? And I have to credit. So I have to say, there's a lot of folks working on this for many years. I'm glad to be a participant and glad to be among you all for this purpose. I did luckily receive a grant to do our project, and I'm really grateful to Beth and Peter for hosting this project, which is it's a board game project about the strike, and you can see it in the back. But it's more than just a game. It's also a kind of a history, because it shows different aspects of the strike, including the events of the strike, all the battles that were fought, but it also as part about the problems the strikers face, including the Citizens Alliance and the police and the National Guard. And then they had solutions. They had this organizer. They made their own strike newspaper, and they had great support from the community. And they worked with farmers and unemployed. And these are really amazing accomplishments and worthy and useful for today in our struggle against these reactionaries that we're all facing. And so it's valuable. I do have another section in there that I call the pros and cons. And one example of that is Governor Floyd Olson, who was sympathetic to the strike, but in the end he called in the National Guard and almost broke the strike. And so Roosevelt himself was sympathetic and actually helped end the strike, but later put most of the leadership in prison. So it's pros and cons. And to me it demonstrates, as workers and as progressives, we have to look for managing and then working with the pros and cons in a way of figuring things out and using strategy, as in a game, and as those leaders like B.R. Dunn and the Dunn brothers and all these guys, and then most importantly, the collective and how they work together. It's really inspiring how they were committed to each other and to win, and they did win. Didn't win everything, it was still an ongoing battle, but there's a lot of successes, and we can learn from that and use it. And so this leads me to say, because I've been a witness and participating, I'm a great admirer of Gladys's work with the oral histories of the descendants. And I've done a lot of work myself with my own project, my own research. And I guess I asked the question myself, like, what can we do with all this? Is it not just the strike history, it's also what we've been doing as participants, as relatives, and as artists. And it's not just here, it's all over the country. People are really interested in this subject. And so my proposal, and it's been embraced by the folks involved here, is to create an archive. In the archive, and I think we're very fortunate to be associated with the East Side Freedom Library, and Peter Ratcliffe, who's hosted and volunteered and welcomed us to have an archive here. And so the proposal is to have an archive that would include the oral histories that Gladys has been, and her group has been collecting for years, but also the different talks. I remember John Hanson at you inspired me the plaque presentation, and it was a great story about his father, and he talked a little bit tonight, but it's the kind of thing that we should be able to pass on to these students who come to this library and learn about the strike and how it is relevant to today. And so there's many sources that would be helpful to people to go forward. So I won't take up any more time, but I did create a kind of overview of the archive, and I have it in these gold sheets. And I'll put it up on the library panel here for anyone who's interested. And we'll make a call for submissions for this, including your own memories, including photographs, including digital materials. And we'll try to gather it and collect it and hold it for future students and workers and the general public. So I welcome your participation in that. Thank you.
Linda, David?
Here we are.
Is really working?
Yes.
We have to go close.
Close.
Really close.
Okay.
I didn't think
Nobody said I could speak first, but
Go ahead.
I think I will. I want to make a few remarks about the film itself, which was made in 1980, 81, so almost half a century ago. That
I guess.
And one thing I want to bring to your attention is that the person who really created this film was Martin Duffy from the Labor Education Service at the university. He was the person who had the inspiration to make this memorial at a time when there were many participants of the strike still living, as we saw in the film, and he was able to, through his connections in the labor movement, track down a whole number of people who were the witnesses. One in particular that I don't think most people know about is the guy who was in the National Guard. I forget his name, Nickerson.
Oh, no.
Dickerson. How did he get in that? Well, he happened to be the business agent for the Millwrights union in Minneapolis, and so Duffy knew him through the labor movement, which is a part of his life that doesn't come out, but that certainly affected how he evaluated his 19-year-old participation in the National Guard. He seemed really moved by his reflections on it. There's still,
one thing that struck me about the Descendants project is we started out with people we actually knew, and then found many others, and it became apparent that the memory of this strike is very deep in the working class in Minneapolis, and but most of these people had been talking to each other or been aware of each other. They knew what had happened with their particular family, but we found out these memories were everywhere, and bringing them together gives them new life. I think very important for this to continue. I think probably our current hero is Ella Mae Ireland, 13 years old, who discovered or rediscovered the strike through hearing about it from her parents. Her great-great-grandfather was Reverend Claude Ireland, who was the national chaplain of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And in that capacity, he presided at Henry Ness's funeral because Henry Ness was a member of the VFW. So that information had been passed along to her by her parents. And so she set out to do this project, imagining the correspondence that Frida Ness was sending, I think, to her mother. And she's an amazing young woman. She's only 13, I believe, but she's very mature and smart and inspired by the story of the strike and awakened to it by the fact that one of her ancestors was a participant in the overall events of the strike and its impact. So that gives us a lot of hope that this story is going to continue on and continue to inspire generations that are coming forward and yet to come. And we heard about some of them. We heard from some of you here tonight too. There's a couple other things I want to mention now before I close about what we still don't know about the strike. There's a lot of interesting little details that emerge here and there. One of them is that if you look closely at the photo from one of the big battles deputies run, there's a woman in the foreground wearing a full-length fur coat in July. She looks like she's a pretty substantial woman, and she's got a club, and she's urging on the strikers and using the club. And then I noticed that she turns up in a couple other photos too, right? And so, who is that? You know, we'd like to know, huh?
If only we knew.
Well, maybe we'll find out. All of these stills that you saw in the documentary are taken from newsreels. And there were 6 newsreel companies present in Minneapolis during the strike, so this was intensively filmed. And as was noted in the credits for the documentary, the film is at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and there's a much more than is been shown in the documentary, and then there's sort of succeeding accounts of the strike that use the same film. But I'm going to travel to Washington sometime this year to look at the film archives that they have there, and the archivist that I contacted told me that they're all cataloged on 3x5 index cards. They're not digitized or anything, so you just have to flip through them and see what you can find there. And there's like 3-4 sentence descriptions on there of what's on that particular segment of film. And then there's also a section of cards that are the stuff that was left on the cutting room floor, so to speak, that is very interesting to me, because I've learned in looking at the medical report that the doctor, this was Dr. McCrimmon, it was a different doctor than the one that Rose Hork mentioned, who treated at least 32 of the strikers at St. Barnabas Hospital. And so these are detailed descriptions of what the wounds were and what the treatment was that was applied. And the description of Henry Ness's wounds can only be consistent with a person who was laying flat on his stomach on the ground. I would guess probably had crawled under an automobile to take shelter from the gunfire, and he'd been shot with a pistol. It entered his lower back here, traveled through his torso, and then lodged up here just beneath the skin next to his heart. So that's more reflective of an execution than some kind of wound that was received in combat. So I think that it's possible that that was filmed and cut out of the newsreel, because it's clearly the people who had pistols, the cops who had pistols, were the officers, the sergeants, the lieutenants, and upward. And whoever did that had to do it deliberately, shoot an unarmed man laying underneath a vehicle. And you can imagine the geometry it would take for a bullet to enter the back of a person laying supine on the ground and then travel through his body. It's a grim description, but it's also very revealing of the fact that every time you hear this, except in this documentary, they always talk about this as being a battle between strikers and police instead of an unprovoked massacre, which is what it was. And that's so that kind of, even that history is submerged. Hennepin County, I hate to use the word, but Peace Officers Memorial Association created a memorial to forgot his name, Lyman, from the American Ball Company, as a hero of a defender of public order. And this has been registered in their national collection of heroes of public order. So it's a complete falsification of history, and that needs to be corrected also. And it also tells us that we're not the only people who don't forget about this, that it's remembered on the other side too. This was just 4 or 5 years ago that this sort of obscene memorial was created to Mr. Ball, not Mr. Ball, Mr. Lyman, president of the American Ball Association. C. Arthur Lyman, it happened that his first name was Salon. I don't know how you acquire that name, but I'll stop here. I just wanted to point out a few things that might have escaped you from, because they were not recorded in the film.
What? Hey there. I'm not sure what you'd like to hear from me, and I would love to make this remark, however. I sometimes see the strike from my grandma's viewpoint. And the older I get, the more I see it that way. What a scary, scary life. It's mentioned in the film by some of the women in there. Not only was it scary, but it was emotionally precarious and financially precarious on all fronts. She had 2 kids to raise. They often took in, my grandpa and my grandma often took in other kids. They had several, I don't know if they were relatives or friends' kids who lived with them over the years, which really meant that my grandma was taking care of them. And the fear she must have had at all times and not seeing her husband for days on end, I know is true. Anyway, I often think about her and the other women. Thank goodness they could help out. And I say yay to that lady in the fur hat, or fur coat.
So first I want to say what an honor it is to have this event here. It's interesting that many of you probably know Mary Wingard, the historian, and Mary's work, and particularly her book, Claiming the City. And she began to write the book, Claiming the City, because she asked the question, how could so much have been happening in Minneapolis in 1934, and there didn't seem to be any echo of it in St. Paul? And so maybe it's taken 85 years, but here you are, you know, and we're talking about the strike here. And I think that it's so important that we share these stories across the Mississippi River and across the experiences of working people in both cities. I also want to, really emphasize Keith's concern in helping us get an archive going. And one of the things that we have here that is very, very special, not just to me, it was something that Ella May used when she came here to do research, and other kids have used, is 2 years ago, someone that we don't know in San Francisco, California, mailed us this gigantic package, and it was the bound volumes of the Northwest Organizer. And and it says in pen in each of the, and they're huge, and it says in each of them, property of the St. Paul branch. And so what, us historical detectives figured out is that these bound volumes once belonged to the St. Paul branch of the Socialist Workers' Party, and that somehow they ended up in the public library of Santa Rosa, California. And this guy from San Francisco found them being, the stuff that libraries get rid of these days is really disturbing, except that made it end up here. And he bought at $10 a piece these remarkable historical newspapers. And you can just, I'm sure, imagine that some 13-year-old kid comes in, and not only does she have Keith's game to sit at, not only does she have this movie to look at, but she can hold the actual newspapers. And so having an archive will make it possible for us to keep this scholarship alive. And the last point I want to make is, and I'm the credentialed historian in the room, to say that history is never over. There's a lot of people who would like to think that so many things in life are confusing and uncertain and ambiguous, but at least we can count on history's done. It's over, it's finished. And it's never done. Because as Dave is raising questions that he's going to go to the National Archives in Washington to look at, the descendants continue to share stories that tell us new things that we know. Here we have young brother Ness with us tonight trying to find out more about his grandfather's life and his story, that we continue to keep peeling away and finding more. And the past looks differently dependent upon what we're trying to cope with in the present. And so, as I think Gladys has said, and Keith has said, and Dave and Linda have also pointed out, this is a story that is very relevant to the situation that we're in today. Everything from who are our friends in government and what can we trust of them, what kind of leadership is coming from the leadership of unions at the national and local levels, what kind of commitment do people make in order to create the conditions that will make their lives better. These are all the critical questions for us today, just as much as they were 85 years ago. And so we will, and 5 years from now or 15 years from now, hopefully right here, but people will be asking new questions and trying to figure things out about what they can learn from this story. So I want to really urge you to help us put this archive together, maintain this archive. We do now live in an era of digitization, so we can digitize these oral history interviews and make them available for people to use them. The kids, and some of you are parents and grandparents, you know I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The kids are eager to learn. They're eager to learn stuff that's relevant to them. They're eager to learn stories that have heroes and sheroes in them. What kids do with History Day is breathtaking. And we will continue. We work with about 100 kids a year, and they make storyboards and plays and documentary videos and interactive websites. And I like to joke and say, and every once in a while, a kid writes a paper. And it is only once in a while. But what they are doing to understand this history and to keep asking new questions about it. So help us build that archive so that we can work with kids. Gladys, do you have an idea what you want to have happen?
I think that you can open it up for a little while.
Okay.
You're all experienced
Well.
chairs, so.
Okay, one of the problems is that without access to the mic, we lose people's voices for the video recording.
Just a brief suggestion, as a seasoned woman, could we just stand up and stretch for just a moment?
Stand up and stretch.
Let's do the whole vote.
If you're just joining us, we're live in St. Paul at the Eastside Freedom Library, where there's currently a panel going on with descendants of the 1934 Teamsters Strike in Minneapolis. We're here on the ground covering this event. We're going to hear some question and answers from the crowd for the four panelists here tonight.
Okay, can everybody take a seat again? And okay, Randy is.
A couple things. The reason this event was scheduled for tonight was originally there was a plan to have a big event publicly outside tomorrow. A committee had been created. A number of people who are here are involved in it, including the folks who are right there in the front. But we were unable to get the proper permits for that. We're still hoping to pull something off yet this before in the next month or two. And in the event we do, this would be an event, public event commemorating the 85th anniversary. Be sure your name is on that list that Peter has up at the front so that you can be notified of it. I wanted to say that I was a close personal friend of Harry DeBoer, who was one of the leaders of the 1934 strike, and I know that shortly after Peter came to the Twin Cities and began teaching at McAllister College. One of his early classes, he invited Harry to come and speak to it, and I know that Harry was extremely impressed by that and by Peter, and I know he would be extremely grateful. He died in 1991, but he would have certainly been extremely grateful to Peter and to you, Linda, and Dave, and everybody here who has come, that this strike is being remembered and commemorated. He saw the importance of continuing this history, and I know he was deeply involved in an early commemoration on the 40th anniversary with a picnic in Minnehaha Park in 1984. Just one other thing, and Gladys thought I should mention this, that this is also the anniversary of the first strike that ever occurred in this country before there was a United States. Peter probably knows something about this. This was the Polish workers' strike of 1619 in Jamestown. And I've just been reading about it in the last few days. These were Jamestown, you know, the colony was created, and the British brought over some Polish workers because they were skilled ship building experts and were quite competent in the technology of shipbuilding. And they arrived in Jamestown to work, and then Jamestown created a government, and the Brits were allowed to vote, but because they were Polish, they weren't allowed to vote. So they went on strike on June 30th, 1619, and on July 21st, 1619, it was announced that they had won and won the right to vote. And it's 400th anniversary, the first strike, so far as we know, in the history of this country.
Peter's words are well taken about the legacy of the struggle of workers continuing, and it continues today with an organization called Save Our Pensions Minnesota. The legacy of these guys, from a lot of them from successor local
544 and then 120.
Teamster Local 544, now Local 120. They started Save Our Pensions Minnesota. Diane Wheeler, Vern Wheeler, Jeff Brooks. Jeff Brooks is here. And they took the idea of multi-employer pension plans, which were on the verge of destruction 6 years ago, and have crafted a vote coming up on the House of Representatives soon that's going to be passed on to the Senate, that's going to make a loan and make pension plans viable again for some of these workers. And I'd just like to point that out, that Peter's right. The legacy of their work continues. Bob McNatten is one of them. They've done great work in that, and they owe it to that history of those guys that came before them. So there you go. Hats off to those guys.
We're voting this fall, by the way, as the House of Representatives. If we get rid of Mitch McConnell, I'm going to have a chance.
Let's do that.
Thank you. Thanks, Gladys. I also want to respond to one of Peter's comments about leadership, and regardless of your personal politics or your voting record, we are at a critical time with regard to rollbacks in all kinds of arenas, especially important to me is climate and environment. Things are being rolled back. You're not going to recognize this earth if we don't make change in November. And so your comment's timely. It's not just 5 years from now, 5 years past. It is now. We have to find ways to make change. I'm curious to know anybody's thoughts who knows the new Scalia appointment, our new labor head. If anybody knows anything about his background, I'd be curious to know what else we need to be watchful for on our own behalf. I don't want my kids, my grandkids, to be working 54 hours a week for $15 a week. We're not going back there.
Do any of you want to comment on that?
Well, I don't know if everyone knows that Trump announced that he's appointing Scalia's son to be head of the Department of Labor. And given the guy that just left and what was in his background, what a mess. I don't know anything about Scalia's son. Skeptical, but.
The lawyer in the Labor Department. Bush. He's not a labor friend.
Probably not. Probably not. Yes, please.
So to me, personally, who has been just a rank and file labor member, but I have also helped SEIU 284 organize 89 workers at my part-time job, along with my brother and my friend Louise. We were the committee that worked for years and finally called in the business union that I was already working under and asked them to please help us have a vote, which we did. And what I was really going to say is we can't forget that it is us who create the wealth. It's the workers, and we could have control if we're willing to keep working on it. It's so sad the way things are. Most people don't even understand the power of unions. Even when we were organizing like 12 years ago, it would take us months of talking to people to get them to even see what unions can do for them. And frankly, they have been chipped away at ever since 1936. That's the simple truth of it, and it's by design. It's not a mistake.
I just want to point out that July 20th is also Bob McNattan's birthday.
Another important historic event. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. I would just like to say, in regard to what we've been talking tonight, this work that started in 1934 and earlier still goes on. Monday, I happened to be privileged to be in the group demonstrating in front of Amazon in Shakopee. And the same tactics that were used in the 30s are being used by the management in Amazon, and the same brave workers that there were in the 30s and before are present in Shakopee right now. And if one of them stood up to talk. She was in full native dress, I'm not sure how to express it, Somali. And the first thing she says is, I apologize that I don't speak Somali. So they're here for a while, and they're leading this strike. And I think it's an inspiration to us all. The work continues. I recommend the current issue of Labor Notes. There's an analysis of the failure of the United Auto Workers to get a vote in the Volkswagen plant down, I don't know, it was in Tennessee, somewhere like that. And it shows that the large unions have lost sight of grassroots organizing and the kind of thing that the 34 strike exemplified, that we're using in Save Our Pensions. And I believe the Somali and the people working against or to organize Amazon. So it continues, but it ain't easy. We got to keep up the fight. Thank you.
If there aren't any more comments, I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and a very special thank you to the East Side Freedom Library, to Peter and to Beth, and to everybody else who works for this wonderful institution. It's now 5 years, so we can call it an institution, right? No? Okay. Anyway, thank you all for coming, and stay tuned about further celebrations for the 85th year. Oh, one more thing. There is a donation box for the East Side Freedom Library, that red box sitting right there. Please feel free to leave a donation.
One other thing, you want to keep in mind with the upcoming election, presidential election in 2020. I've been, every time somebody sends me something that's political on Facebook, and on the bottom, flush the turd on November 3rd. That says it all.
Peter, once again, thank you. Oh, wow.
Thank you for joining us here. This is Jen. I am here in St. Paul. We were streaming live with Unicorn Riot from the East Side Freedom Library. This evening, 2019, marks the 85th anniversary of the 1934 strike in Minneapolis. It began as a Teamsters Strike and went into a general strike as the summer progressed. It started out, as we saw before, with a coal drivers' strike in the Minnesota winter. Thank you for tuning into our broadcast tonight via our live channel or our live stream, maybe on Facebook. If you have enjoyed the stream tonight, please consider giving us a donation. We're all volunteer-operated media collective. You can donate to us at our website, unicornriot.ninja/support-our-work. Dashes in between support our work. Thank you very much. And we're going to go down here.